But while we're doing that, I'll just introduce myself briefly for those who don't know. My name is Kelli Nakamura, and I am the Executive Director of Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages. And Tadaima has been kind of an annual event for us. We did skip last year. We needed to take a little bit of a break, but basically since 2020, we've been doing this virtual event. And so if this is the first time you're even hearing of it, I'll put the website in the chat. You can go and watch most of the previous um, year's programming is still available on our website, on this website, and on our YouTube channel. So there are hundreds of things to watch. So I have not, I'm gonna be honest, I haven't even watched all of it. But I've definitely watched all of the sessions that I've had with Kelli Nakamura and Kyle Kajihiro, who are both in Hawaii, and they're going to talk to us about the campsites that are in Hawaii. And then Kyle has also come over here to the continent a few times this year and last year to attend some pilgrimages. So he's going to tell us from I don't want to say an outsider's perspective, but from maybe from a somebody who is not normally here on the continent, what your perspective is. So I'll just go ahead and pass it off to I don't know who was going to go first. Was it Kelli or Kyle? Kelli, go Kelli.
Okay, so good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you might be. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Kelli Nakamura. I am a professor of history and ethnic studies at Kapiolani Community College. I also teach at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So for the first part here, I'm going to be going and providing a very kind of brief historical context about incarceration here in the islands, which is, of course, a little bit different from the wide-scale incarceration that occurred on the mainland or the continental United States. So to do so, I have a very brief kind of presentation that will kind of highlight these sites. And I encourage people to kind of reflect and think about how different or potentially how similar they might be as far as the incarceration sites on the mainland. So without further ado, I'm hoping you all can see my site. Okay, there it is. So again, thank you again for being here today. Hawaii's incarceration sites are a little bit different from the mainland incarceration sites. So first off, I'd like to highlight the fact of their kind of unique diversity as they were spread out over multiple islands. We're going to go over the various types shortly, but what you see here is that many of them, in fact, were concentrated on Oahu, which had the largest population of Japanese. Then, of course, we also see a large number on Kauai as well as Hawaii Islands. And the reason for, of course, the concentration of these sites and the large Japanese populations were, in fact, because of the plantations and the large plantation cash crop economy that, in fact, had dominated the pre-war period here in the islands. Okay. So to kind of highlight maybe some of the differences or the unique aspects of the Hawaii incarceration sites. So first off, of course, on the mainland, we do have a larger number of sites incarcerating a larger number of people. We also have a very kind of different categorization of the different kinds of sites that existed in both places. So of course, we know that the majority on the mainland were Department of Justice camps. Here in Hawaii, we do see, of course, many of them being U.S. Army, they were called internment camps. In part, that was aligned with the fact that military or martial law had been instituted since 1941, immediately after or the hours following the December 7th, 1941 Japanese attack. I do kind of want to also highlight the fact that in Hawaii, we also had this kind of unique experiences of community structures and plantation facilities being utilized for the purposes of incarcerating, either very temporarily or sometimes for weeks on end, local residents. We do have, of course, a difference in the numbers of the various types of prisoners that were incarcerated. So while, for example, on the mainland, there was a wide-scale incarceration of entire Japanese communities, here in Hawaii, we had only 2,000 individuals, many of them who were the elites or leaders of the Japanese communities across the islets. These were, of course, newspaper editors, business owners, Japanese language school instructors or teachers, prominent individuals who essentially were targeted because of their role and profile within the Japanese community. Okay. So of course, some of the more wide or commonly known incarceration sites in Hawaii are here located on one of the major islands, Oahu. So we have, for example, Sand Island detention camps, literally tents that were just very hastily erected in the days and weeks following the Pearl Harbor attack. Eventually, of course, prisoners would be moved to what would eventually become one of the largest predominantly POW facilities in the Pacific. This is Honouliuli, located out in Ewa, basically more of the westward side of Oahu. And you see, of course, the camp was actually divided between essentially POW facilities and, of course, facilities for local residents or prisoners. So we do know thousands of POWs from Italy, Germany, Japan, and in fact, even Okinawa were incarcerated in the war. And about 800 local residents ultimately called Honouliuli their home during the duration of the war itself. Okay. However, we do see kind of a unique diversity of incarceration sites on the neighbor islands, as we like to call our neighbor island friends and family. On Hawaii Island, again, so-called the Big Island, we see military facilities being utilized. And this is a drawing by George Hoshida, a very kind of renowned incarcerated individual who in fact was an artist, and he provided essentially very kind of nice, at that time, kind of contemporary representations of what the camps actually look like from the perspective of a prisoner within the facility themselves. So on Hawaii Island, of course, we do see the utilization of existing military facilities. We also see on other neighbor islands the use of so-called community facilities. And these photos actually are photos that I actually took as I traveled across the various islands. And by the way, of course, this was before COVID, but you, of course, can go to these islands right now and actually visit some of these sites. Many of them, in fact, with the exception of Kilauea Military Camp and Lanai City Jail, are in disrepair. If not, many of them do not exist anymore. And so when I say they are in disarray or disrepair, this is kind of a perfect example. Kaunakakai Jail on Molokai is literally just has been moved throughout the community. It was towed and literally deposited in this middle of this park, just kind of overgrown with, you know, bramble and brush and trees. And you can tell essentially it is literally falling apart. There have been efforts to restore it or preserve it, but clearly, of course, it costs a lot of money. The necessary historical kind of research or documentation is a very time-consuming progress. And so literally, this structure is rotting away. Okay. On our other islands, we see, you know, structures that have literally disappeared. So for example, on Kauai, we do see essentially the courthouse and the jail these were facilities that were utilized to interrogate and incarcerate individuals. So the courthouse, of course, is in the middle. You'd see essentially the jail to the side, a very similar structure that you will also see on Lanai that I will show briefly. We also have the non-existent, currently Waialua Jail. And you can see these are kind of formalized jail facilities that were utilized for the purposes of incarcerating local residents. These structures do not exist anymore. They have been demolished and renovated to more appropriate correctional or detention facilities. But still today, essentially, we do have photographic evidence of the buildings or the types of structures that were used to house local residents here in Hawaii. And again, I invite all of our participants to kind of reflect back and think about how different this in fact is compared to the mainland incarceration experience. Okay. And finally, of course, I have another example of one that has in fact been preserved, is literally in the center of Lanai City. So Lanai still today is one of our smallest islands, least populated islands. And there are predominantly still today two kind of driving industries on Lanai. It really kind of captures pre-war kind of understandings about the economy. So there's predominantly two kind of industries, one being essentially tourism and the other one being essentially agriculture. So Dole, the fruit company, has a long-standing presence on this island. And literally you have in the middle of the town, it's all centered around Dole Park, a rectangular, mid-sized park, and literally that you'll see the grocery stores, the schools, the community structures, the small businesses centered around that park. And of course, surrounding the area are residential housing. But right smack dab on one of the corners of essentially Dole Park is historic Lanai Jail. And weirdly enough, it's kind of been turned into a tourist attraction, which is kind of weird to think about. It is open to the public. People can just walk in. There's no real signage kind of identifying what it was. What does it mean that it was a historic jail? You can actually go in and experience the jail yourself. You can actually walk in. So this was the actual structure that was utilized to incarcerate and house Japanese prisoners. You will see it's right smack dab in the middle of the town square itself. So again, think about the fact that if you have a very small minority being incarcerated and publicly incarcerated, I invite everyone to kind of contemplate what impact that would have on community response to military or martial law at this point. Okay. And again, you can literally go in there and see and experience for yourself the kind of facilities in which these men were in fact housed. It's kind of this weird tourism experience where you kind of blend essentially tourism and entertainment with history, but not really understanding the sensitivity of this topic or kind of the larger context of why this is important. But literally, as you can tell, it's right smack dab in the middle of the town. And we really do see kind of this unique kind of blend of tourism and memorialization, but without the proper historical context. Okay. So that was kind of a very brief overview of these kinds of historical sites, of the incarceration sites that do exist. And I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Kyle Kajihiro. And again, we're going to just pause a little bit and wait till the end of Kyle's presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any and all questions. So thank you. So if you have any questions right now, you can type them into the chat, and I will also try to respond to them as Kyle is presenting. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you to Kimiko and Caroline and JMP for putting on Tadaima again. This is an awesome series. I learned a lot from all the videos. I haven't watched all of them, but yeah, thank you all for coming. I'm gonna talk story a little bit and just tell you a bit about my own journey to understanding more about how I'm learning about Japanese American incarceration and through the pilgrimages that I've attended. I've only been to 4 so far. So let me share my, and just briefly a bit about myself. So I'm Yonsei in Hawaii. My family came from Hiroshima, Yamaguchi, and Kumamoto for sugar plantation. And I grew up in Mo'iliili, and I still live there after going away to college in Oregon for a bit. My degree, after working in community organizations for a number of years, I went back to grad school. So I got my degree in geography. So you'll see sort of more of a geographic way of thinking about this history. And I'm now an assistant professor in ethnic studies at UH Manoa. Okay, why isn't it advancing? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the context, historical context. I think Hawaii played a really weird role in influencing the policies around Nikkei incarceration during World War II that preceded the war. And then I'll talk a bit about pilgrimage as transformative justice or a transformative process of community building. I went to Tule Lake, Heart Mountain, and Towpath, and I also went to Manzanar, but I apologize. I don't have my drive. I thought I had it, and I was going to put some pictures in, and then talk about some observations and conclusions. The part where I get into the cases, it will be a little bit more of a like I'll just run through some pictures and impression. It'll be more impressionistic. So, okay, so just for context, right? The Japanese in Hawaii, we had a large percentage of the population prior to the war, about 40%. And in 1909, there was a great, they called it the Great Strike. 7,000 Japanese plantation workers went on strike. Technically they lost the strike, but they did win improvements in conditions. But this sent a wave of panic through the Haole, the white oligarchy and the plantation owners, right? That the Japanese were that organized. And then in 1920, there was a multi-ethnic strike. Japanese and Filipino unions joined forces and struck. And this is the first multi-ethnic strike in Hawaii. And so this was the beginning of this kind of racial panic that was began to take hold in Hawaii, where the Haole plantation owners were afraid of all the brown people kind of rising up and joining forces. And then the US military, which was also the other kind of pillar of power in Hawaii, was afraid of the Japanese as being potentially a fifth column, right? So this is something that Gary Okihiro writes about in Cane Fires, the Japanese problem and the anti-Japanese movement that picks up steam in the 20s and 30s. The labor militancy and the sheer demographic power of Japanese in Hawaii threatened the Haole plantation control. And then there's also, the military concern with Japanese as a fifth column in the context of Japanese imperialism in the Asia and the Pacific. There were two other kind of key events that happened in the 20s and 30s that really, crystallized anti-Japanese sentiment. The Fukunaga case, where a young, mentally ill Japanese youth, or he was an adult, but young adult, kidnapped and killed a child of a business leader in Hawaii. And it became a very polarizing case where he was tried and executed within about 2 weeks without having due process and without a mental, kind of evaluation, all of that stuff. But it was the beginning of this idea that the Japanese were out to get the white people. And then in 1931, 1932, a Haole wife of a Navy captain accused 5 young men, they were Japanese, Chinese, and Hawaiian, of rape. It was false. It was a false allegation from all the evidence that we've seen, but it sparked a kind of like this bloodthirst for vengeance. The Navy admiral called for lynching them, stringing them up on trees. The jury could not convict, and so after they had a hung jury, the Navy captain and his buddies sought vigilante justice. They killed Joseph Kahahavai, a native Hawaiian boy, and we're going to dump his body. And so it became a case of a murder case on top of this alleged rape. And that began to crystallize these racial dynamics in Hawaii of the whites on one side and the elites versus sort of the Asian and native Hawaiian majority. And they were mostly working class, right? But again, this again sets up this notion that Hawaii needs to have more discipline, more control, and the beginnings of plans for martial law begin to take shape, or some sort of military government. And so this feeds into plans for the mass incarceration that happened in World War II. Of course, December 7, 1941, there's martial law declared, and about 2,000 Japanese in Hawaii are suspected of disloyalty. They already had a list, and they began picking people up right away into those camps that Kelli has researched and documented, which is so valuable because those sites have been erased from our memory growing up here. Under martial law, the military had sort of carte blanche. They were, the judge and jury. And so really, if you think about it, we had such a small percentage of our population, less than 1% of the Japanese in Hawaii were put in concentration camps. But if you count martial law as a kind of turning the entire islands into a prison camp, then we have these layers and degrees of incarceration going on, where people are free to different degrees. And so only the leaders in the community, the so-called troublemakers or enemy aliens, were rounded up. And that selective incarceration created a very corrosive environment, because those families who had someone incarcerated were then shunned by the rest of the community, right? It was like you didn't want that rubbing off on you, so you kind of like avoided those families, and it meant that they were even more isolated. They kept it, secret. They didn't want to talk about it. People were picked up and whisked away at night and just disappeared. And you see echoes of that as in the ways that the ICE raids are treating migrants today, right? Just picking people up and disappearing them. So I think to keep in mind that Hawaii and Japanese American incarceration in general set a certain precedent for the way the government abuses certain groups of people when they decide that you're no longer worthy of having rights. You can be disappeared. You can be put in concentration camps. And so me as a yonsei growing up in Hawaii, no one in our family was incarcerated, and we also had nobody in the immediate family that was in like the 442nd or the 100th Battalion, right? The decorated Japanese American fighting units. And so I think we're fairly typical of a lot of Japanese in Hawaii with that kind of experience of just enduring martial law, telling ourselves stories about blackout and curfew and all of those things, but not having the kind of traumatic experiences. So all I knew about the concentration camps, but it was only the 10 WRA camps that I was aware of, and really I only started learning about it when I went away to college in Oregon, and at that point I started to learn more about the complexity of all the different types of camps, the different degrees of criminalization and incarceration that was going on. And I heard about the Manzanar and Tule Lake pilgrimages back in the mid 90s when I started to get involved in Asian American activism, but I could never sign up for one. And so it was only last year that I got to go to my first pilgrimage, which was Tule Lake. Sorry, I'll just skip over. And so made me think of, and it was really transformative for me as someone who didn't have that experience in our family, coming as a observer, as someone that was there to learn. But I found it really powerful. And so I began thinking about like the power of pilgrimage and the fact that it has now spread from 2 sites to like almost every camp has a pilgrimage. And so generally pilgrimage as a definition, is kind of a journey to a distant sacred goal, right? And on the outward journey, you are going to a new place, a strange place, sometimes dangerous places. And that ordeal is part of the experience that matters. It shows that you have some kind of commitment, right? But there's also an inward journey that goes on. You go inward and you have personal transformation. Oops, I misspelled it there. Increased self-knowledge, you're braving physical dangers. And so I saw some of that happening with the pilgrimages that I attended. So the first one I went to, Tule Lake, I won't go into all the details, but this was one that had, I guess Tule Lake has the stigma of being the troublemaker place, the no-nos, the renunciates, and all of those things, all the differences of different degrees of being marked, as somehow a troublemaker. I didn't quite understand all of it. So that was just an amazing learning experience. But I also saw this kind of transformation of the, they did a great bus tour, but the recognition of those who resisted, right? Like asking people to stand and be recognized if you were incarcerated, if you were a no-no, if you were renunciant, and valorizing that experience, right? Giving respect for the fact that people resisted in some way, even if the community, the Japanese American community, didn't recognize that as resistance in the past. It's now gaining recognition, and that shifting of the narrative was really powerful. Sacred practice, right? Doing oshoko and memorializing those who passed, who were incarcerated, going to these sites that were, kind of iconic places, landmarks, up at Castle Rock, visiting the jail. And, I've seen this picture as a famous picture of the jail inside the stockade, inside the camp. And then visiting the actual site was really, kind of a chicken skin experience, where you see where people lived, the graffiti they wrote on the walls, going out and seeing how the latrines were laid out in open, and then seeing the little shells that tells the story of the lake that was there that was drained, right, to create a desert, and then you put a concentration camp in the middle of this place. Then I went to Heart Mountain, and it is also an indigenous land. There was the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee and the draft resistance movement there that was also being memorialized. Heart Mountain also had this reputation of being a place where, there was a lot of artwork that came out of it, right? So the creativity in the camps that's being remembered and celebrated shows something about the spirit that people had. They had taiko performance, so it kind of like really built a sense of people coming together. The root cellar for storing vegetables. So Heart Mountain fed a lot of the other camps because it was such a agriculturally productive place. It was just a fascinating visual place to go. They had a great museum that included, questions like the no-no issue and renunciants. I mean, the resistors. And so, there was a sense of remembering these different forms of resistance. And then this also happened in Tule Lake and other places. The kind of circle, the intergenerational conversations where survivors were telling their stories to family members and to others. These are just some visual impressions I had of the way that the landscape and the remnants told a story of, hardship. It told about, what people had to endure. And so Topaz was the other one I went to last year, that was organized by JAMP. Just an amazingly flat and dry landscape, very dusty. So you get a sense of the environment that people are in. Going and visiting the sites, seeing the remnants of what's there, of life that was lived there. The kind of care of putting in, a stone like entryway to your barracks, right, and to beautify the place, and then the coal that was used to heat the buildings, the usu that they made to make mochi, and just, kind of the harshness of that environment. And then the issue of course at Topaz was the Wakasa stone, the killing of James Wakasa, and the monument that the incarcerees built in defiance of the authorities, and then thinking that it was lost, but then through the work of Nancy Ukai and Jeffrey Burton and Mary Farrell rediscovering the stone, and then the struggle over who gets to preserve and could tell the story. It's an ongoing struggle, of course, but it made me think about the importance of monuments, the importance of memory, and stones, investing stones with meaning. And in Hawaii, that has a lot of resonance with Hawaiian sacred places, where stones are alive with the spirit, with ancestors, and with memory. And so some preliminary observations, just that pilgrimages are a practice of collective journey to sacred or otherwise significant site of commemoration, that they promote healing of intergenerational historical trauma through these various healing circles and sharing, that's a place of education, of learning, of sharing stories and knowledge, This was a really important. It's a place for community building, especially for Nikkei in spread out in diaspora. It's like a place where you come together. You don't have to explain yourself to others, right? It's a place that you just belong, which is really powerful. And growing up in Hawaii, I think we take for granted that there's a lot of us around, but on the continent, I can see why that's such an important space to have. And then, number of people I've interviewed will talk about like this is a way that they came back to their identity as Nikkei, as Japanese American. It's a space of organizing and activism where the transformational experience opens people to, the current issues that we're facing and why it's important to speak out. And then it's a remapping. It's transforming a site that is either forgotten and hidden away, or a place of trauma into a sacred place, a place that's important to commemorate and to then invest with our prayers, with our intentions, that it becomes a living site again. So that was my impressions. And then it made me think about a Hawaiian activist practice. The island of Kaho'olawe had been bombed for, I don't know, 50 years from 1941 until 1990. And then through activism and reasserting cultural practice on the island, they have made it into a sacred place. And so every month, the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana takes groups to the island to do ceremony and to do restoration work on the island. And they call it huaka'i, as a kind of a journey with a purpose. It made me think about pilgrimages. It's the same sort of dynamics of preparing yourself, being open to receive lessons and experiences, and then coming away transformed. And I think that that's part of what's going on. And so I don't have anything more profound to say about it, but I just felt like that was what was happening. So thank you very much. I'll stop here and we can talk stories some more. Thank you.
So I've been trying to answer some questions in the chat. So thank you for those who've reached out to me. And Kyle, if you have any questions, you can see them. But does anyone can we open it up, Kimiko, or do you have any questions or things that you'd like to mention at this point?
Just that pilgrimages are awesome and everybody should try to go to one. But I think there's a lot of, interest in the chat. So, I mean, if anybody has any questions and you feel brave enough, you can just unmute and ask.
Please, let's talk story.
Oh, Katie has a question.
Hi, I just wanted to reflect what's happening with your two presentations. Kelli, thank you for doing the research that you've done. I live in Northern California now, but I was born and raised in Molokai. I had no idea about that jail there, Kanakakai.
Oh.
So that was like, I'm still like going, wow, really? No one ever talked about that. No one,
And
including my parents.
Thank you, Katie, for bringing that up. I mean, just talking about in particular the neighbor island experience, I think is so valuable and so important. I also want to give kind of people insight, and maybe Katie, this can resonate with you, what it means to live on the neighbor island. To actually do research on neighbor islands to kind of understand. I actually have pictures also previously of what the jail used to look like in its original format. So how do you get research done about incarceration sites on the neighbor island? Well, I had a friend who knew the family who ran the only, and still today, the only pharmacy on Molokai.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly, right? So what you're going to do is you are going to call up a family favor to ask that friend to meet you. You fly in and you meet at Kanimitsu Bakery over pancakes, hot coffee, and orange juice. And that's how essentially you get these kinds of photographs or these kinds of stories. And of course, this person was super generous. And she said, you know how you should ask people on Molokai about their stories is that you should call or contact the local ornithologist. Now, for all of us who love SAT words, that's the local bird scientist who lives on Molokai. And she knows everyone because that's how she does research. And so I met with her. And of course, what happens is they're like, yeah, here's our address. Just walk in. The doors are not locked. We'll see you there after breakfast. And I said, what? But they said, oh, just write your information, your contact, your phone number, your email, but likely more phone because people do not email. Post it on this community bulletin board and ask people to reach out to you because you have this specific question. And she says, well, that's how I study birds. If I wanted to know the bird patterns or their migration patterns throughout the island, we just put it on the local bulletin board next to essentially the post office, and that's how you get these stories, you get these kinds of photographs. And again, if you've ever been on the neighbor island, you're like, yeah, that's about it. It literally is what we refer to as the Coconut Wireless News Network.
Yeah.
You know someone who knows someone that will put you in touch with everyone. And once you have that in to the local community, people start sharing their experiences and trusting you with their stories, trusting you with these photographs, and essentially being willing to share kind of the personal experiences besides, the very tangible evidence of literally these structures deteriorating in Malamo Park. So I hope that kind of speaks to you and your experiences and your
Yeah.
stories, potentially growing up on places like Molokai.
Right. And I love that you learn the culture, the informal ways how people communicate and begin to trust you, even though you're Japanese American. That took some nurturing to do that. So thank you so much. And Kyle, you and I met at Changing Perspectives in Oakland several years ago. Remember that
Oh,
conference with
yeah.
yeah. So I love how you talked about the pilgrimages and what that did for you. And for me, my dad was a veteran. He was a 442nd veteran. In fact, just this several months ago, my whole family, my kids, granddaughters, we went and buried my father in Punchbowl National Cemetery. And so for me, moving from Hawaii to California, where everyone the whole thing was about the no-no boys and redemption for them. And I didn't talk about my dad being a 442nd veteran. It almost felt like contradictory. And I think because I've been in the community long enough, it's complex. It's not right or wrong. Both did the best they could. And so now I'm like integrating, Nono Boy's experience because a lot of my friends, that was their family history, as well as my father's history of what he did, to prove his loyalty. And,
Right.
you talked about the discrimination, the racism, and parents never talked about that, but I can just imagine what they had to go through. I grew up in Kuala Pu'u on Molokai. It was a pineapple plantation. Del Monte was there. The white managers lived in custom-built homes by the tennis courts and the macadamia nut groves, and the rest of us lived in identical houses. The Japanese community, the Filipino community, the Hawaiian homesteads, and all the other mixtures of people there. It was quite segregated. So, yeah, it's been a transformative journey for me in different ways, but I really enjoyed hearing your experiences.
Thank you. Thank you. When did you leave Molokai?
I left high school. I went
School?
to Mid-Pacific Institute, and
Okay.
then I was just home on vacations, but I left Hawaii in 81, got married, moved to Northern California. And so I have now lived longer here than I have back in the islands. And my kids and granddaughters are here. So, this is home.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing, Katie.
Yeah,
Good to
thank you
see you
so
again.
much. Thank you.
I think we have Marlene and then Annette who have questions.
Well, I just want to make one comment. I mean, I think that the questionnaire that people were forced to fill out really created an artificial definition of what it means to be a loyal American, and fractured the community in sort of a ridiculous way because you know just by answering yes doesn't really mean you're loyal, and by answering no doesn't mean you're disloyal. But if you talk to some, especially some of the 442 veterans who have passed, I mean, their whole self, you know, it was so wrapped up in that if you were a no, you were absolutely considered, you know,
Traitor, disloyal, yeah.
yeah. I mean, so this whole messed up definition really got wrapped up in patriotism and all of that, and was all like a phony definition. And but anyway, that's just a comment I want to make. I just have a question. I'm curious about I think Nancy or Kelly was talking about the POWs that were in Hawaii, and that somehow they were treated more benignly or nicely than the actual Americans, Japanese Americans that were which I find really interesting, because I think kind of the same thing happened in this in the camps in the United States, because there were some German prisoners of war in close to the camps, and they were in the U.S., and they were in the communities, because they were white, they were treated better than the Japanese Americans who were also incarcerated in that, that same area. But you're talking about Japanese soldiers, right? Or or Okinawan soldiers that were incarcerated.
Yes, I'm actually trying to bring up photos right now. So there was such a high level of interaction. So what happened in Honouliuli, it was actually predominantly a POW site. And what would occur evidently on a regular basis, and it was announced within the community, that essentially these POWs would be sent out to work detail. And knowing that when it was announced, local residents, Okinawan families, realizing that it would be likely their kinsmen, their cousins, their relatives, people they knew as classmates would eventually be there. There would be an entourage. There would be a large group of people that would actually be there to greet, to meet, to welcome these POWs on their work detail. It got so bad that the military had to try to regulate this kind of level of fraternization, because they would share fruit, they would give money, cigarettes, gum, fruit. And what I'm actually trying to pulling up right now is actual photographs. So they actually took photographs of each other, they exchanged drawings of with one another. So I'd like to share that. So while I'm looking for that, Annette, do you have a question?
Could I before that, while you're looking, could I just jump in and add something to it? I think one of my colleagues, Mary Yu Daniko, is doing oral histories with the Korean POW survivors and their descendants. So apparently, Honouliuli, the largest group were Korean POWs who were considered Japanese nationals, right? Because Japan had occupied Korea. So there's and a lot of them came from Jeju Island in Korea for some reason. So she's been going back and doing interviews there. So this is all new kind of information that's coming out right now. Thank you.
Hi.
Did you have a question on it? Yeah.
No, not real. I am connected with the Gil Okawa's connection group that is going to be the pilgrimage to Santa Fe, where you talk about the 2,000 men, Japanese essays that were sent all around. I think there were like 6 different transfer boats. I am married to a descendant of transfer boat 3. After I read Gail's book, I connected the picture in Gail's book to my husband's grandpa, and that's how we got connected. But anyway, there's all these intersections with like Two Lake. We have 2 family Tashiro family members that married people from Two Lake, and my former co-worker was Tommy Kono, who was also a Two Lake person. My brother-in-law, Masayama Saki, would come down from the Bay Area to come visit them, because he knew all the Two Lake people that were still in Hawaii until he passed away in 2014. Anyway, more recently, as we got into this pilgrimage stuff. There is going to be one next year in May to do from, we did a pilgrimage to Kilauea Military Camp because a lot of our grandparents were there. And then my husband and I, he wanted to do his journey. So we walked around Sand Island, which doesn't have much. And then we went to Angel Island and connected with the person who does the immigration center on Angel Island. And there is a special room, not room, but the kitchen.
The display.
That's all refurbished and has a lot of Gail Okawa's pictures in large, and displays in that area. And then from there, my husband and I went to Albuquerque, took a drive to New Mexico and got to see the monument, which was really meaningful for him, for me, because I married to him. The other intersection is that my dad is a MIS, and being military intelligence, they couldn't say anything. So while I was growing up, I didn't know anything. So I'm a survivor of intergenerational trauma, because my dad had PTSD, but we never knew it was PTSD. He was a drunk, whatever. But our family had to survive that kinds of stuff. And only now I'm realizing all the stuff I'm going through while I'm traveling with my husband to do this pilgrimage stuff. And like both of you are saying about healing, being there, understanding what was going on. I mean, there's just this rock in Santa Fe, because all that area is all suburban homes. But according to Gail, there are some survivor kids that were growing up in the area, and they remember the prisoners, and so they're going to connect with the people there for next May. So if anybody of you interested, contact Gail Okawa. And I can't go, but I did want to go. They're doing Angel Island, Missoula, because some of the transfer boats went to Montana and then to New Mexico, Santa Fe, and having some connections with the people there. So just for your information.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's amazing. And thank you for doing all of that work of, retracing and commemorating. I wonder if, have you seen the reports that the JCCH did on with Jeff Burton and Mary Farrell on the looking at the different sites in Hawaii? They recommend putting a plaque at Sand Island.
We were trying, myself and another descendant wanted to do some tracking of pictures and maybe where. When my husband and I walked there, there didn't seem to be anything that would mark where the tents and the.
It's kind of like where the Mats. It kind of crosses the road, and so it's like where the Matson parking lot is, and then the wastewater treatment on the other side. It kind of crosses there, but there's that corner in the Matson parking lot. They were suggesting maybe a plaque or something. So I'm kind of want to pursue that. So we should talk story.
Yeah.
Get JCCH and stuff on board. Yeah, I think that would be good. And then we can gather there and do stuff, right?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And Gail, I've been helping Gail to digitize some of her recordings or interviews. I have a student helping her. So that's great that you folks are doing that.
Thank you.
Well, some people are also, by the way, just private messaging me as to seeing some of these photos. Again, giving examples of kind of the unique experiences in the Hawaii incarceration camps. So these are essentially the POW compound processing station at Honouliuli. And what you see is essentially that they regularly interacted with locals. And in fact, locals took pictures of them and with them These are photographs that were provided by local Okinawan residents who actually developed friendships and close relationships with these POWs. These are some of these individuals here. You can tell that they're POWs because they have that PW on their pants, so they were specifically identified. And when they went out to the community, again, there was a high probability that they would in fact encounter people from the same prefecture, from the same city, people who they went to school with, in fact, that could give news back from Okinawa, because of course, during the war, that kind of communication would be cut off, as well as, of course, with the Battle of Okinawa, Okinawa was in fact decimated. And so you'll actually see them, local residents, taking photographs. So again, this is how, if you really do kind of hands-on local history, it really is reaching out to community members, asking them for their stories, asking them for photographs. And in fact, you'll see them interacting and having these very unusual encounters with POWs. Again, something that is very unique for the Hawaii incarceration experience. And in fact, such close friendships would in fact develop that one of these individuals, she's rather elderly right now, her name is Clara Goto, actually received drawings from these POWs. This is an example of one of them, as a token of their gratitude for the kinds of friendships and essentially relationships that had been developed. Again, something so interesting that you do not see in other incarceration sites. So we invite people within the communities to share their experiences about these incarceration sites that extend not just, of course, generationally, with your own experiences with these sites or with your families or the lack thereof, but also the other residents of these incarceration centers. What were their experiences? How did they respond to the regulations that were disproportionately enforced on some rather than others? We'll put it that way. And you'll see kind of these unique experiences and things that really do come out. So I think we have
Kelli, can I ask you about the Okinawan POWs at Honolulu? Were they all in the military, in Japanese military, or were they like civilians?
That's a great question. So there was kind of this blending where these young boys, and I say boys because some of them were as young as 14 years of age, were conscripted into the Japanese army. So when you say, well, were they actually combatants? Actually, many of them were just simply just swept up into the Japanese army, forced to conscript, and many of them were in fact underage. So we see literally boys as young as 14 also being incarcerated in the same facilities that were in fact designed for adults. So you see this kind of wide age variety. You'll see, of course, different experiences. There was also separate quarters for the officers who had better facilities, actual beds, better accommodations than just the lowly foot soldiers. And, you hear these kinds of experiences. And I know, I think Annette was mentioning about her father being MIS. And the usage of language skills. So sometimes, local Japanese residents would be used as de facto translators with these POWs. So again, these kinds of qualities that were deemed suspicious would be utilized by the military in various capacities. If you folks do have additional questions, I would be happy to put in right after this my contact information in the chat. Kyle, if you also feel comfortable in also fielding questions, feel free to do so. Kimiko, can we turn it back to you then?
Yes, well, I would say also I dropped in the chat early on, but Kelli just had a book come out. Kelli, would you like to talk about that really quick?
Oh gosh, this feels like a commercial plug here.
It is a commercial plug.
Yes, it is. I know it is a commercial plug. So actually my book was released in October 31st by the UH Press. It actually details kind of the unique experiences of the incarceration centers here in Hawaii and their experiences, but really kind of draws on the pre-war plantation experiences that Kyle alluded to that would help shape the kinds of treatments and experiences, that's plural, across the various islands and that differ with various groups. So we have a kind of this curious inconsistencies of the application of processes or punishment on local Japanese residents. So it kind of highlights the unique kind of distinctiveness of the Hawaii incarceration experiences to provide additional understandings of the motivations for incarceration with kind of a very human aspect, where, you know, people wonder about things like, so what do you do in the incarceration centers? I have a chapter that talks about how you make booze in Honolulu. One of the great kind of experiences that, you know, when you're in prison, you want to have something fun to drink. How do you get booze? And that was the questions that I would ask, because you would hear about these parties that would happen. Well, these local residents would ask their female relatives to bring yeast packets with them and hide them in their underwear, either in their bras or in their panties, and then have to use the restroom with, of course, the intent of retrieving these items. And these female relatives would also bring large flower vases. The men weren't interested in the flowers. They were actually interested in the vases that would be used to actually produce the alcohol to store them. Because you wonder, of course, now that have the ingredients, so they would take fruit that they would eventually ferment from essentially the commissary or from the cafeteria. And they would utilize these large, essentially structures, containers, excuse me, that were brought by their female relatives. They just dump out the flowers and use them to actually create booze. So if you know anything about Hawaii people, we love to party. We like to have certain adult beverages. And I wanted to provide kind of a more human aspect to it, to kind of, you know, think about what would you do in these kinds of unique circumstances? How would you entertain yourself? How would you host parties? And how would you celebrate or honor the fact that certain people are in fact being shipped out to other incarceration sites? So it is available. You can see it on Amazon. But yes.
It's a great book.
Thank you, Val. And I didn't pay him to say that.
I think next to Daima, Kelly, we need to actually do a video of you making
booze,
some
yes,
sort of booze.
That would make my family so proud on so many levels. And here's how you make booze.
Exactly. I think we should. I mean, why not?
Yes.
Why
so
not?
I do a little bit off the cuff kind of history, you know. So one chapter is titled "They Even Checked Our Assholes." It was I love that quote. It's from a gentleman from Waianae. His name is Ninosuke Hanabusa. And that name sounds familiar. He is a relative, the grandfather of former Representative Colleen Hanabusa. And he talks about his experiences. And she later reflects upon the fact that her grandfather also never really shared some of the experiences that he had. Yeah.
Well, on that note, does anybody have any last questions before we kind of say goodbye? I'd be scared of what they are after that, but well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to Kelly and Kyle. Oh, yes.
Can I just put in a plug for the Tule Lake pilgrimage?
Of course.
One of the things that happened that Kyle talked about is I became an activist. I am Wet'sudu for Solidarity. And 2 years ago, we did healing circles, 400 people, 220 healing circles. And so we're doing it again for next year. So please come. It enriches your experience to be able to process what comes up for you during that time.
Yeah, I think that was one of the problems with the redress movement. You know, we got the apology, we got the money, but we really didn't deal with the psychological ramifications of what happened to our community. And really, you know, the Nisei generation, I think, was really severely damaged because of, you know, they were young adults, teenagers, and you know, you're just kind of coming to grips with your identity and who you are. You're in this toxic environment, and I think they were damaged, and I think that that trauma was passed on to the Sansei and then the Yonsei generation. But you know, it was sort of masked in like depression, you know, I think substance abuse, you know, those kinds of things that you know, I don't think nobody, I guess it's a very Nikkei thing. We don't want to talk about any of the bad stuff.
Right.
They're gonna put on a good, happy face, that kind of thing.
Right.
But
That reminds me to just we're really excited. We're bringing Satsuki Ina out this month on the 14th and 15th. She'll be doing some public talks, and she'll be speaking to school groups at Punahou. So
That's
Oh,
great.
great.
He's wonderful.
yeah,
Well, great. Well, I highly encourage anybody to go and attend the Tule Lake pilgrimage, though be forewarned, you must register as soon as that registration is open. You've got to send that registration in, because by far, I think more than any other pilgrimage, that one sells out like within a day. So it's a highly sought after ticket. Anyway, so thank you again to Kelli and Kyle. Appreciate getting some Hawaii perspective, some JA Hawaii perspective. And we have one more session tonight. We're gonna our next program is going to be about the Nisei Week Queen Court program in LA. So please join us in about an hour if you're interested in that. And we will be putting up the recording of this session on YouTube probably by tomorrow. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care.
Bye.